Alrighty, welcome. This is the first set of notes for Chapter 10, GUIs. And this first set of notes is called Lazy Buttons. And it's lazy buttons because this GUI is going to have buttons that don't work. And you'll see here as we go through these steps to create this GUI. But the way or the reason that they're lazy is because steps 5 and 6 will not be implemented. So we'll do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. Skipping 5 and 6, we'll save those for a different set of notes. But basically, those steps will allow us to create this GUI, but it won't actually do much beyond that, beyond just looking good. So let's get started. All right, so there's a starter file called Lazy Buttons. Get that all set up. Basically, it has the information on the 7 steps to create a GUI here. I'll assume you've already gone over the introductory material for this unit on GUIs, and this notes then will then show you how to implement it in Python. So we are going to be using the tkinter module, and we're going to import that before we can do anything. So we need to import that a special way because we don't want to have to constantly refer back to this module and type it a bunch of times. So we're going to say from tkinter import asterisk, which will import the entire module and allow us not to have to constantly refer back to it. We'll just be able to just use the classes contained within. Okay, so we're going to follow our formula, our template for creating a GUI, starting with step 1. Step 1 is create a root window object from the class TK. So this is a root window, so I'm going to call it root. And there's nothing special to do here other than just call the class TK, and that will create our root window. All right. As I said, the root window is like, think of it like the roots of a tree. So it's gonna be the base of this GUI. Everything's gonna attach to it and build on top of it. Right now, once you have a root window, there are some different methods you can utilize. Feel free to look these up that allow you to modify the window. If we were to modify the window in a couple ways, we could say root.title, for example. Give our window a title, buttons program, some dimensions, geometry method. This method requires pixels in this format here, and argument it expects. Here that this is in pixels. All right, and then once we have step 1 done, just so we can see our work in action, we're also going to implement step 7 right away, because step 7 is where we kick off the root Windows event loop, and then we wait for events to happen. Basically, that means it displays the GUI for us. If you think about the Windows calculator, when you click that app in Windows, that calculator pops up onto your screen, and it basically just sits there and waits for you to do stuff, for you to add numbers or whatever. And this is the same thing here. So when this root main loop kicks off, our app will pop up onto the screen, and it'll wait for stuff to happen, right? Allowing us to actually see the GUI. So that's why we did it at this point. All right, let's run our program. And there it is, lazy button. So 300 by 300, so you can see what that looks like here. Now in Replit, this is not going to behave as natively as it would if we had done this on a Windows machine. We're doing this all in the browser. So you can see, like, you click and drag it, and it's a little bit laggy. And the functionality is a little weird, but it does work. All right, so it's nice that Replit allows us to do GUIs. And also notice that if yours isn't working at this point, maybe, or you don't have this window here, you maybe didn't create the right kind of replet. You have to be in the tkinter replet in order for this to work. All right, but let's see if it allows us to close it. And we can close the GUI. All right, and then it closes out. All right, so window popped up. It was waiting for us to do stuff. So far, so good. All right, let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is where we will create a frame. Frame is going to be like a container widget. It is a widget itself, but it's going to basically be a widget that contains widgets. So it's a way to organize other widgets. When you place things inside of a frame, the frame will just expand so that it fits whatever you place inside of it. But basically, it's just something. It's just another window. Basically, we place within our root window, right? That'll allow us to attach widgets and stuff to it. All right, so call the variable name we'll use here is app for like application, and we're going to call the frame class, right, from the tkinter module, and we're going to tell the frame class where this frame belongs, and our frame belongs to this root window that we created. Right, everything's got to attach to the root window, so we're going to go attach it that way. So basically what we're saying here is place the frame object that we're going to be creating, which we're going to reference by app, into the root window. And we'll talk more about the arguments passed to these classes as we go here. So anyways, now we have a window inside of our window. So the frame is inside of the root window. If we kicked up the program again, feel free to do this if you want, but you're not going to notice much difference because the frame isn't going to be really visible. It's going to hold other stuff. That brings us to step 3. So we're going to define the layout of our widgets here. So anytime you add a widget, you have to like tell it how you want to add it. So like, how do you want to lay this out in this window? And we're going to do that using, there's different layout managers you can use. So we're going to use one called Grid to start. We'll look at a couple different ones that you can use. So it's called a geometry manager or layout manager. And it's basically different methods for organizing the widgets in different ways. So we're just going to say by whatever the default behavior of grid is, we just want to use that on our frame object app. And a way to think about what the grid is going to be is eventually here as we continue to build this GUI, you're going to see that basically this layout manager arranges things into a 2-dimensional table, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. And that's kind of how it manages its layout. All right, step 4. Now that we have the first 3 steps done, now we can start creating some widgets. And this is a lazy buttons program, but buttons, we don't know what buttons do unless they have a label. So we're going to go ahead and create a label for our application. All right, so this is the label class from the tkinter module, and this will create a label for us. So use the variable name LBL. Now, when you create a label, just like we did with the frame, you have to tell it where to go. And we want to place and organize our widgets inside of our frame. So we're going to have app be the first argument, right? That's the frame, remember, the frame object, because we want this label in the frame. And then we're going to give the label some text that says I'm a label. All right, and the first argument is what we'll call the master. So the master is like who owns this widget, or who does it? Where does it belong? And we want it to belong to this frame. That's why this is the first argument. We're not going to get too much into the grid management layout here, so we're just going to use default layout. But everything we want to add to our GUI, we have to tell it where to go. So we always have to use a layout manager to tell it where to go. Otherwise, you're going to get some funky behavior. All right, so this should create a label for us. All right, let's go ahead and see how we're doing so far. All right, so I've got I am a label on there. For some reason, my root window title went away. I'm not sure why that is. We'll have to figure that one out. Go ahead and stop that for now. I haven't fully figured out the quirks of Replit yet. With tkinter, this is brand new. In years past, we had used just idle to work with tkinter, which worked well. So there might be some different quirks with Replit, so we'll just have to be aware of that as we move forward. All right, time for a challenge. If you want to pause the video and try to create a second label, all right, and a second button. Oh, we haven't created our first button. Timeout. Before you challenge, let's create a button. We're still on step 4, keep in mind, right? We're still creating widgets. So let's create a button inside of our frame. There's various classes of widgets that you'll be able to use from tkinter. Button and label are 2 examples, but they all more or less work the same way with different, a little bit of variance, but you call the class, right? You tell it the master, right? So where does it belong in this GUI hierarchy? And then, any additional arguments you might need, like is there text that belongs on it? And then after you do that, then you use a layout manager to get it to display. Right? So there's our lazy button. All right, now time for a challenge. So go ahead and try to do a second label and a second button for your GUI. So go ahead and pause the program and see if you can accomplish that. All right, welcome back. All right, so we had you create a second label and a second button. All right, so label 2. Second label. The master is the frame in this case. Different text, different variable name. Still need to use a grid layout manager on it. All right, and then we can create a second button inside of the frame, similar to what we did before. So this time I won't add text, default text to it right away so that I can show you the configure method. Right, so the configure method is going to allow you to modify this button after it already exists. So if you don't set it up how you need it to be right away, you can always go back and edit or reconfigure it. And this is useful if, like, when you click on the button, you want the text to change or you want something to happen to it. You can always go back and configure it. All right, so here's an example of using configure. So in this case, we'll configure it now after the fact to have text of me too. All right. All right. Lazy buttons. All right, there's another way to edit information related to widgets. So let me show you that here. On the create widgets step. Like if there's a third button, for example, starting out with our basics. Another way to edit options related to the button are to use our indexing syntax where you use the square brackets. And text is one of the options that the button has. And if you edit the text of the button, you can assign it a new value. All right. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this set. We've got our lazy buttons. 5 and 6 are steps that we are skipping. This is going to be taken care of in the event handling part of the notes. So that's a different set of notes, right? But we just did this entire program procedurally, right, from top to bottom. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Clearly, it works. But what we're going to do is we're going to refactor this code now such that it's all put in a done in a class perspective. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a new file here. I'll call this lazy buttons 2. Lazy buttons 2. Change my import here to lazy buttons 2. All right, and we're going to do a lot of the same stuff we just did in lazy buttons, except we're going to refactor it. Because this unit, we're not going to use a procedural approach. We're going to continue working on our object-oriented programming approach. And we're going to use classes. So we're going to refactor this code to make sure that we can set this up properly. All right, so get our import for tkinter all set up. That looks good. All right, and then we're also, since we're going to use a class, we're going to create a main function to run and create objects from this class that we're going to create. All right, and you're going to see here as we create this main function that this does simplify it in some respects, right? Because our steps can be summarized quite concisely in the main function here. So I'm going to go ahead and type this out and run through this. So step 1, remember, is root window. We'll go ahead and create a root window. We'll give it a title and geometry as we did last time. I'll just make it a little larger than I did last time. Change the title to lazy buttons 2. And beforehand, the second step, which is to create a frame, was done like so. But now we're going to do steps 2 through 4 in our custom class. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create application class, capital A application. This is a custom class we're going to write to handle steps 2, 3, and 4. Right? If we jump back over to lazy buttons, we recall that steps 2, 3, and 4 are creating the frame, defining the layout, and creating the widgets. So all of that will be done in our class. And then after we're done setting up all that information, we're going to skip steps 5 and 6 still in this case. Eventually 5 and 6 will also be part of our class, just not in this set of notes. And then the last step is, again, kick off the main loop so that our GUI pops up. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And oh, we haven't created an application yet, so this has to be commented out. All right, so for now we just have, and again, the title's not popping up for some reason, but we've got our basic GUI showing up. All right, so now we need to implement our application class. So we'll go ahead and do that. All right, so for some context, what we're doing here is we're going to rely on the root window from the tkinter module. And then we're going to write a custom frame, basically. And this custom frame will do whatever we need it to do and have whatever we need it to have. But we're going to create basically our own version of the frame class. So I'm just going to call it an application. Okay, so create our class application. And this application is going to be a custom frame object. The application that creates lazy buttons. All right. All right. So we remember from our object-oriented programming unit that when we create a class, we want to include a constructor, something that allows us to construct objects. All right. So similar syntax. And the second argument here that we're going to include is the master. So if we refer back to lazy buttons, or even the way I wrote it down here in the main, we are passing an argument through. And that argument is the master that our frame is going to be attached to. Right? And the frame is attached to the root window. So master really refers to the root window in this case. In this context, what is this constructor actually doing? Let me go ahead and initialize the frame for us. All right, so this next part of the code is a little beyond the scope of what we're going to do for this class. It gets into some concepts such as superclasses and subclasses, class inheritance, and it's something that we don't cover until really you get to AP Computer Science. So this next part of code is not going to make a lot of sense. I'll go ahead and explain it a little bit so you have an explanation. But that's, if that's as much as you go into this, that's fine. We're basically going to ask you to just include this code in your GUI classes for now, and then you'll come to understand it as you continue on in your computer science career. So basically, what this part of the code is doing is it's going to rely on another class to set up our custom class. So the other class it's relying on is the frame. That's why we had to include frame here inside of these parentheses. And we're basically saying class application is derived from class frame. And in order to set up an application, we want the application to behave like a frame. It's just going to be a custom type of frame. So we want to utilize the constructor of the frame class, which we don't have immediate access to in this code right here, right? So the way we get immediate access to it is by using this syntax here, all right, in this super function. All right, and basically, you can see here, I wrote out an explanation just in case you wanted, something to refer back to. You're like, I'm not sure what this is doing. Well, here's what it's doing. This frame is our application superclass, right? It's the parent class of our class. The class application is based on. So the super function will allow us to access the superclass of application, which is frame. It'll allow us to pass references to it such that it can be set up and constructed correctly. So we're passing along the application object's master, right, the root window, so we can set that up properly, right? Because if you look back at lazy buttons, we use the frame class and we passed it a root. So when we create our application class, we also want to be passing a root. In this case, root is the master. So that's why that happens. There's a couple different ways to do this. This is the way the book does it, so I included that way. This is another way that's common to do it. Two ways to refer to the frame class's constructor. So take your pick. That's all I'll say about that for now. Okay, so then after we have done that, basically that is step 2. We're creating the frame. All right, this whole class is really step 2, right? We're creating the frame and everything within the frame. All right, so next. Use a layout manager. We're going to display it and lay it out. And again, let's look back at lazy buttons. So what did step 3 look like there? Define the layout of the widgets. We said our frame is going to be gridded. It's going to be put into the root window and organized. Same thing here, but now the frame that we're talking about is this application object self. So it's self.grid in this case. And also, right when this frame is constructed, we want it to come with all the things that we want it to come with. So like we want a bunch of buttons or widgets or whatever else included in it. So what we can do is we can create a method in our custom class, for example, called create widgets, which will handle step 4 for us. Create all the widgets. So we'll go ahead and do that here. So create a method called create widgets. Pass a reference to self. All right, in this case, create widgets. It's like before. Create 3 lazy buttons. And then this happens similarly in a similar way to the way we did it before. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste code to create our 3 lazy buttons here. So create 1 button, 2 button, 3 button. Give each button some text. Make sure the button is attached to the frame, right? So the frame, remember, is what organizes all our widgets. And the frame now is an application, which is a custom frame. So self is what we need to pass as a first argument to our various widget classes. All right, and we also, since they belong to this application object, we can refer to them like we would an attribute. We can say self dot. So these are basically now attributes of our custom frame. All right. Also, you can see here that we're using the grid layout manager in a little more detail, and you can explore how that works. All right, so now we have our 3 lazy buttons. Decided to lay them out from left to right rather than top to bottom. The way we're able to do that is because we utilized this grid layout manager. All right, just like I said, it kind of resembles an Excel spreadsheet, whereas you can kind of lay things out in grid fashion. So if you specify row 0 in different columns, you can get it to look like this. And then Sticky will explore more in a further video.